We are resuming the public hearings of the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. Our next witness is Ms. Sahar Francis, a lawyer from Palestine. Please, Ms. Francis, would you like to indicate something about your background and then make an opening statement? I can ask you some questions on the basis of your statement afterwards.
Good afternoon. I'm Sahar Francis, a human rights lawyer and working with Palestinian political prisoners since more than 27 years in front of the military court system and the civil system in the occupied territories. Today, I would base my intervention on the work that I'm doing on a daily basis, based on the visits I implemented to the different prisons and detention facilities in the occupied territories and inside the state of Israel for prisoners who were arrested after the 7th of October 2023 and were transferred to detention facilities inside the state, mostly from the Gaza Strip. Me and my colleagues in the office, we implemented hundreds of visits. We met more than 350 detainees in the last year, mainly from the Gaza Strip, but as well we do visit prisoners from the West Bank and East Jerusalem that they also are interrogated, held in the Israeli prisons. It should be highlighted as well that all the practices related to the sexual assault or the rape or the physical attacks that the prisoners and detainees were subjected to in these months, it's not a new practice. In our work with the prisoners, we documented cases of rape, of sexual assault in previous years, although it wasn't in the same average, it wasn't a widespread policy in the way that we witnessed after October 2023. And the main other thing is the failure of the investigation of these violations by the Israeli authority. It was the case before that nobody who was involved in such assaults were found accountable, and not now after all these complaints from the detainees. And it should be also highlighted that most of the detainees are afraid to talk about it, or they are shy to describe what they got through. Lots of people that I visited myself, it was very clear that they are hesitant to talk about the experience that they went through, especially when it comes for the sexual assault that they faced. They talked about torture, they talked about starvation and the humiliation inside the prisons with the conditions, but they avoided to describe the sexual assault that they faced. But some of the other detainees, they talked about the sexual assault. I would describe the techniques and what we considered as serious sexual assaults. So after the mass arrest campaigns that started with the beginning of the war against the Gaza Strip in October, of course, we as lawyers, we were banned from meeting the detainees, and most of the detainees were kept or were forcibly disappearing. We didn't know even in which detention facilities these detainees were arrested and where they were, and under which conditions they were kept. It was very few cases where detainees who were released started to talk about the very bad conditions. It was just on March and April 2024, when we started as lawyers to have some kind of access for the detainees from the Gaza Strip. And it was more organized since the beginning of May 2024, when we were able to request and approved more visits to most of the detention facilities. I should highlight, for example, Anatot detention facility, we were not approved any time to visit there physically, and all the information we collected from detainees who were released after being detained in Anatot. But we had access for most of the other detention facilities, especially Ofer, the prison and the army facility, in Sdei Man, in Iqtzi'ot, the Negev prison, Majiddu, Gilboa, all the other prisons inside Israel. Most of the cases that we documented, the detainees described the strip search accompanied with lots of violence, with sexual assault that was reflected. The soldiers were attacking the detainees on the sensitive areas, or in some cases, the soldiers were holding the the penis or the other organs and pushing them or squeezing them. Lots of threatening to be raped, lots of bad wording, cursing, and humiliation for the detainees. Almost all of the detainees who were arrested from the Gaza Strip were subjected for this naked strip search, and you saw the photos published in the media of taking hundreds of detainees just with the underwear, and in the way transferring them from the Gaza Strip to the detention facilities, they were subjected for these attacks, beatings, and hitting and kickings in the whatever the soldiers have, sometimes with their hands, with their legs, or with the weapons, or with the magnetometer, and they were hitting them on the sensitive areas, and with the Tizer electric machine as well. And when they arrived to the detention facilities, and especially in the Sdei Man detention facility, that was the closest to the Gaza Strip, most of the detainees that I met, they were describing daily attacks by the soldiers and the special units to their sections, where the soldiers were picking randomly some of the detainees, because each section used to have 120 detainees, and they were, after implementing the searches on all of the section, they were taking some of the detainees, asking them to stand on the fence, because this detention facility was a kind of big how you call it, yard that would be surrounded by a wire fence. And they were asking the detainee, while the detainee would be handcuffed or shackled in some of the cases, to push his hands up, and they would implement bodily search. In some cases, one of the soldiers will take the pants down, and then they were pushing the sticks. And most of the detainees were describing the black plastic, very hard plastic stick that we see usually police using these. Yes, exactly. And this is where the most cases described in this way, that the police or the soldier would push the stick into the anus of the detainee. In some of the cases, the detainees were bleeding or were injured and without being treated after. In some cases, others were also reporting that this has happened while they were still wearing their pants. like they tried to push the stick without getting the pants down. But also detainees and detainees from the West Bank, not just those from Gaza, and especially in the first months after the war, when the special security and the police were raiding the sections in the different prisons, in Gilboa, in Majiddo, in Ofer, in in Naqab as well, Qtsaout, detainees were reporting that they were also subjected for strip search. And the police were pushing the detainees, let's say if there are 6 or 10 people or 12 people in the same room, when they were naked, the police were pushing them over each other, so they were falling on the ground on top of each other, and in some cases they were just cursing and shouting and humiliating them, or mockery. In some other cases, the police were using the magnometer in order to hit the detainee on the sensitive areas, or just to push the magnometer in between the legs while doing the strip search. Some detainees also reported about the soldiers forcing them to put these sticks in their mouths, and also some of the detainees were reporting that in the time of the transfer, one of the soldiers will take the gloves, the plastic gloves, and he will blow them. So you have the fingers, and then he would push the one of the fingers in the mouth of the detainee and request him to do an act like in the sexual relation. So this was very humiliating, very degrading for the detainees. But the most serious cases were the cases of the rape by the stick that was implemented in some of the detention facilities, and especially in the Sdei Timan.
Especially Sdei Timan?
Yes.
Others as well, though?
Yes, of course. Individual cases happened in other detention facilities, like in Qtsaout for sure, and in Ofer and Gilboa, but the widespread use of this stick and pushing it into the anus of the detainees happened in Sdei Timan. And I would say in the first, most of the cases we documented was in April, May, June, July last year. Actually, the Sdei Timan was the worst detention facility when it comes for the physical attacks on the detainees, and detainees died inside detention in this year. More than 62 detainees died out of torture or health neglect in the different prisons and detention facilities. We don't know exactly how many from the Gaza Strip died. We are still discovering some cases, like lately from last week. We are trying to allocate the place of detention for some detainees, and we would be informed by the army that he died in that day or the other day. So people died inside the prison out of the torture and the health neglect in the last year, and we never reported so high level of death inside custody like we did in the last year.
Can I just go back? You said that most of the sexual assaults, the rapes, were in the April to July period last year.
It could be before as well, because we started to meet the detainees in late April, beginning of May, but some of the detainees were arrested in October, November, and some of them, they were saying that they were subjected to these practices after a couple of weeks in detention, so before our visits. But I would say it happened in a very massive way in the first months of the war and after.
That's what I would have expected.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, please.
No, I'm. Yeah, I think maybe later we can discuss further specific cases of detainees.
Okay. Well, that overview is very helpful to us and informative. Given the number of years you've worked in this area, worked with Palestinian prisoners, it seems from what you described to have been a very different situation since 7th October 23.
Yes, definitely. Because if I compare with the second Intifada, for example, the mass arrest campaigns that took place in 2002, it was accompanied with lots of violence, with shooting and killing people, but on the level of the sexual harassment and the sexual assault, no. I wouldn't say that it happened in 2002 in the mass arrest campaign in the second Intifada.
And why do you think it's so much worse now, that it's so dramatically different?
I think it's related to the actions of the 7th of October and a kind of revenge. And with all this, it's totally related to the genocidal actions that started to happen in the Gaza Strip and after the 7th, yeah.
When you say in relation to the 7th of October, do you identify particular aspects of the 7th of October that is generating such a high level of sexual assault?
Of course, it was a lot covered and talked about the attacks, the alleged attacks by Hamas committing such also sexual assault. And I think it's part of it that the soldiers and other police personnel were also committing these actions, and the lack of accountability would also encourage people to be involved in such violations, and not just on the level of the sexual assault, the torture itself, the degrading treatment, the physical abuse of the detainees and all the detainees, I mean, against women, men, elderly, children, all of all those who were arrested, all categories were subjected for these physical attacks and abuses, and including sexual assaults. So also children were facing such sexual assault as well.
Girls and boys both?
To be honest, cases of girls I didn't document it, but boys, yes. Yes.
Do you know, from your experience, are the boys detained with adult men, or are they detained separately?
No, they detained separately, but in the same prisons, in different sections, but in, separate one, exactly.
And yet the practices of sexual assault, sexual violence were the same for the boys as for the men?
Usually, yes, it's mostly with strip search and the attack physically on the boy while he's facing strip search. And those from Gaza were also, the boys from Gaza, some of them were also reporting trying to enter this stick, push the stick into their anus.
Right, okay. Do you see any evidence of any accountability at all? You mentioned lack of accountability as one factor.
Very, very few cases. So far, just in one case that was reported on the media as well about the rape case in Sdei Timan, that there is a legal process against the soldiers, 5 of the soldiers who were involved, And lately, last week, a charge sheet was submitted to the military court against these 5 soldiers. We don't know how this case will end up. And from my experience and from following these cases, it's very rare that such a charge sheet will be presented. And it's not a guarantee that they would be really imprisoned and according to the penal code, because also if you review the charges, it wasn't the correct, in my eyes, in my opinion, it's not the correct charges that were submitted reflecting the actions that took place. And in previous cases that we followed in the past, even it didn't reach, for example, one case of rape in 2015, where it was investigated. The investigative office recommended that a charge sheet should be submitted against the people who were involved. And at the end, the general prosecution closed the file, claiming that they couldn't point who gave the order to do such an action. And they didn't charge anyone. Most of the cases, even if they are investigated, they would be closed before reaching this level of submitting a real charge sheet to the court. And also the level of sentences, like soldiers who were involved in killing Palestinians were not subjected for imprisonment more than a couple of months. Like in the last case from Hebron verifying the killing of Sharif, the Palestinian detainee, the soldier was sentenced for 8 months in detention. So this gives indication about how serious is the investigation and the whole, all these cases in front of the justice system, how serious they see these violations.
In this current case you mentioned, what are the charges in the charge sheet that are there, and what charges do you think are missing that should be there?
You know, as it was reported and from the facts that we collected, and we know that this was rape. And it was supposed to be reflected in the charge sheet that these soldiers were raping the detainee under their custody, but instead in the charge sheet it was described as a very serious physical attack against the detainee. And it's not described at all that this was as a sexual assault against the detainee.
And do you have a theory as to why not?
I think it's to avoid the seriousness of the crime. And of course, it's an outcome of, because this case was reported in the media, and before reaching this level of submitting the charges, the public was totally against the investigation and the arrest. The soldiers were arrested for the first couple of days. Later, they were released on bail, and even the crowd tried to raid the detention facility where these soldiers were kept in order to release them. And they were condemning and attacking the prosecution and the military prosecutors for investigating the case. So I think it's also kind of balance between the public order and the attack that they would face and what really happened, the events.
You mentioned, when I asked about why the sudden increase in the period after October 7, you mentioned 2 factors. One was the revenge for October 7. The second was the lack of accountability. As a leading question, do you think that there is also a new atmosphere because of then Security Minister Ben-Gvir's statement that all privileges from prisoners were to be withdrawn, and basically saying that all prisoners and detainees were to be subjected to punishment regimes?
Of course, this was reflected on the level of the physical attacks and the severe conditions that the prisoners living under till today, starting after not just the 7th of October, but since Ben Gvir took responsibility on the Ministry of Interior Security, which is responsible on the prisons service, immediately he started with punishing the Palestinian prisoners much before the 7th of October, actually 2023. From his first day in the ministry, he ordered to take away some of the rights that the prisoners were benefiting from inside the prisons, where they got these rights after long years of struggle and hunger strike and other ways of struggling to guarantee these rights under the prison system. He took them away till we reached this point where starvation, physical attacks, canceling the family visits totally, like it's not just the sexual harassment. There is increase in all the violations against the prisoners after the war. He totally banned, like the prison system totally banned the Red Cross Committee from visiting and monitoring the conditions of the Palestinian prisoners after the war. The family visits were canceled totally. The clothes and the belongings of the prisoners were confiscated. The prisoners are locked in their rooms 23 hours a day. They hardly can go for 40 minutes or 50 minutes recreation. They cut the water and the electricity at the beginning in the first couple of months from the prisons. So the prisoners were punished severely under Ben Gvir, of course. He even fired, like he replaced the responsible person on the prison service, and he elected someone that he's from his party in order to more be open for his orders and implementing his orders.
Have you found the same upsurge in cases of sexual assault in relation to women detainees as to men detainees?
I would say this time it was very visible that it's against men, not just women. And I think this is intentional because first, the number of the women that they were arrested much less than the men, but also in the Palestinian society as a conservative society, I would say, in some levels, it would affect the whole society if you sexually assault the men. It would mean a lot about, after the release especially, that you did this for almost everyone, every man in the community that was arrested.
And what is the impact of that? How does it affect all Palestinian society?
You know, because would mean that you're not, of course, this is a very harsh experience for every person, irrelevant if it's, as an individual, irrelevant if you're a man or a woman. But I would say, and also from my discussions with the men I met that they were subjected to this, it's not an easy for to think about your relation with your family member, with your wife, with your children after the release, if you want to share with them what you got through, and to think about how they will look at you as the father, as the protective image in the family, as the responsible in the family after such an experience, and not mentioning your neighbors, your cousins, or the expanded family members or the community, how they will treat you as a man after being subjected for this. And this is, I think, caused most of the detainees not even to talk about it. They don't want to admit that they were subjected. They want to keep it secret because they don't want to face it later after the detention.
Because it's so widely known, is there a suspicion that everybody who was detained has been raped?
To be honest, some of the detainees that they spoke, they told me that you should know that it happened almost with everyone, and you will not find everyone able to talk about it. But you should know that it was very widespread. And some of the detainees, they said all of those in my section were subjected to this. So I think you can say that most of those who were arrested in these months were subjected for such practice.
At the individual level, what do you find is the continuing effect on the men after their release? Physical, psychological, emotional?
I think in all levels, also physical and also psychological and emotional. Physical, of course, not alone just the assault itself, the whole conditions that these detainees were kept in for long periods, like handcuffs, that they were shackled for all the last 15 or 16 months and forced to sit on the ground at the beginning for several months, or the way how they are facing the starvation, the lack of hygiene that affected physically their health. Most of the detainees are affected by the scabious. So it's not just the sexual assault itself, it's the combination of all these conditions that physically will have an impact for long time after the release, I think. And also like this will affect also the psychological and the emotional, especially if you don't have the support, or if you don't talk about it, how you will deal with it. I'm sure it will affect your relation with your family, with the others at some point, of course.
Do you consider from the people you're talking to that these practices are continuing?
In some cases, yes, but not. I'm not sure if it's in the same widespread manner or not. We feel there is some changes in the behavior and the treatment, not perfect, of course, no. Still, the conditions are very, very difficult. But also, we should say that we were not able to meet all the detainees. We are talking about thousands of people who were arrested. And if I managed to visit tens, or as an office we visited 300 plus, this is very little out of them. Still, till today, there's more than 2,000 detainees from Gaza are still held in detention. That I don't think all of them were visited. So there's lots of people that they never talked, they never met a lawyer to tell him about what they faced in detention. Will continue for us. We will continue to collect information after the exchange, the release of these detainees. I'm sure there's more people that they will talk about their experiences.
Thank you. Anything you would like to add before we finish up?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. You have an overview that not many people that we have spoken to have, and so it's particularly good to hear that overview about the experience, and particularly disturbing to hear your suggestion that it may well be that all detainees are treated this way. That raises very broad questions. So thank you. That concludes today's public hearings. Thank you very much for watching, if you did watch. We will be resuming the public hearings tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Geneva time. We will again hear from witnesses who are able to tell us exactly what they have seen or heard, as well as medical experts. Tomorrow we'll be looking particularly at reproductive violence, and so a slightly different aspect of the question of sex and gender-related violence from the one we have looked at today. So tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Geneva time. Thank you.